Okay friends, Ryan Adams here, naturalweightlossmastery.com. Today I would like to talk to you about how to maintain your weight after a successful period of weight loss. This is something people struggle with. This is something admittedly that probably affects a small portion of my audience right now, but very good for all of you, I think, to wrap your head around, very good for all of you to hear some advice on before you do eventually get to your goal weight. It would be helpful, I'm sure you'd agree, ahead of time to know exactly what to do anyway once you get to your weight loss goal in terms of maintenance. So yeah, you might be watching this thinking, Ryan, is this really relevant to me today? Yeah, absolutely, you bet it is, even though it might not seem as such. I think my first point of note on this is that these are two different goals and they're two different phases. And when I say these are two different things, what I mean by that is weight loss and weight maintenance. These are two different goals, two different phases, and therefore they need to be treated as such. They need to be treated, whilst I adjust the camera briefly here, slightly differently as a result of that, okay? Rather than, I mean, most people do treat them differently, but as you'll see as I start to go through my bits of advice on this, most people treat them extremely differently versus just slightly differently. And I think the bottom line on this is that you must treat these things differently, but with a similar sort of criteria, a similar sort of framework for what you were doing previously. And it's just a few small adjustments here and there that need to be made. Understand right now that after you do lose weight, no longer do the things that you did when you were 20, 30 pounds heavier to maintain weight, no longer are they going to be sufficient for where you are right now. That's a very long phrase I've just given there, so it's kind of hard to follow. I haven't explained it well, very conscious of that. What I mean exactly is, for example, let's talk about this through the calorie lens because it's the most obvious example. If you required 3,000 calories to maintain your weight when you were 30 pounds heavier than you are right now, are you going to need 3,000 calories again at the weight you're at right now, 30 pounds less in other words, to maintain that weight? No, absolutely not in most cases, unless your exercise or activity levels have changed dramatically in your weight loss phase, which they might have, but it's likely that not that much of a jump. So that's the first important thing to mention. Yes, these are two different phases and therefore require different strategies, different modes of thinking, different goals, and should be treated very differently, but not extremely so, if that makes sense. A lot of people, they do a reverse, would you believe, not always intentionally, a reverse of what they were doing in a weight loss phase when they get to a weight maintenance phase. And wow, doesn't that lead to them rebounding, the scale shooting up? How many people, maybe this is something that we've experienced, in the past, but how many people do you know who have lost weight, look incredible, you see them 6 months later, and they've ballooned back up again, okay? They made all that wonderful progress. They were speaking really positively about what they were doing, suggesting that this was something that was going to stick. It looked like it was going to stick because they were doing it for months on end, and then you see them a couple of months later, bang, they've gained weight, maybe even more so. That happens a lot as well. So I think it's really important to understand that there's a difference between these phases. They need to be treated differently, but not extremely so. That's important. I think there's two aspects to weight maintenance, successful weight maintenance. One is quite obviously the strategy, and I'm going to give you lots of insight on that today. I know a lot of people want to know about fat intake, calories. We're going to get into all of that straight away, what to do with exercise. We'll get into the strategy. The other one, I know this will bore some of you because you've heard me talk about it so much before, and it's not particularly glamorous, is the mindset. So you need both the strategy and the mindset in order to successfully maintain weight, I believe. So I'm going to share all sorts of advice on those two subjects. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's start with the good stuff, what everyone wants to know. What do we do, Ryan, with the fat intake? You're always talking about having a low fat diet on the whole, limiting, those fat rich plant foods, the nuts, the seeds, the avocados, the nut butters, I don't know, tofu, tempeh, so therefore soy derivatives, what else? Olives, coconut, and so on. Yes, I still think that in a weight maintenance phase, you should have a relatively low-fat diet. I will stress that, okay? So again, remember, I'm not talking about anything radically different here. I still think you should follow a low-fat diet. I think it's the healthiest, so weight loss aside, I think it's provably the healthiest, demonstrably so. So I don't want you to start skyrocketing it up. Also, I think really your fat intake, and I can talk about this either very, very specifically, or I can talk about it sort of a lot more conceptually. And I can say things like, increase your fat intake, have a few more fat-rich plant foods into your diet. That's more of the conceptual conversation. It's a little bit vague, it's a little bit broad, but a lot of people understand it. Or I can talk about the specifics. So for example, if you're somebody for instance, regardless of rightly or wrongly, wherever you stand on this, if you're somebody that's counting calories right now, if you're somebody that is well in tune with the macronutrient ratios of your meals and your overall daily diet, then I want to talk to you about the specifics of calories. So there's two different ways to tackle this. So generally, my advice to most of you, because I know lots of you, you're not calorie counters, you don't like tracking things, certainly not on a regular basis. So my advice to you is have a little bit more of these fat-rich plant foods in your diet. One, because you can do so. Two, because many of you probably need it, although that's a whole different live stream from me here. I've just sort of dropped that bombshell in there, but some of you will be better for having a little more fat in your diet if it's already low fat. If you've already got a moderate fat diet, like a medium, let's say, a moderately high in fat diet, yeah, I'm not going to be pushing you. I'm not going to be suggesting to increase it. But generally speaking, if you're following a philosophy similar to mine here, you've probably already got quite a low fat diet. I think going up will benefit a lot of you in terms of hormone satiation and mood and feeling good as well. Because yeah, okay, it's a bit anecdotal, it's a bit intangible, but it does absolutely matter, okay? It's what you feel best doing. That is worth something. It's hard to measure, but that is absolutely worth something. So some of you will benefit from going from low fat to still low fat, but increasing a touch. So that's the general advice. The more specific advice for those of you who want the nitty-gritty and the calorie counting is, I would say, if you're on 15% of your overall calories coming from fat, right now, go to 20%. If you're on 20%, maybe go to 25% and just see how you get on with that. So again, I'm not talking about radically jumping up to 30%, 40%, 50% of one's diet coming from fat. Also, I mean, this is where things do get slightly tricky, and we're going to segue into my next point here, my next bit of advice here. If you are somebody that's tracking right now and you go from 15 to 20%, there's a question there. There's a variable there of your calorie intake. Is your calorie intake changing? And therefore, with that step up, is that boosting your calories, or are you keeping the calories the same, just having a larger portion of fat and maybe getting rid of something else? Now, also, the thing you get rid of, that also depends. I would say for most of you, it ought to be carbohydrates. Not all of you, but most of you, I would sacrifice the carbohydrates, increase the fat as best you can. It's going to be tricky. For those of you who track and measure your calories, you already know about the sort of conundrums, the quandaries you get into when you start switching around things in your diet. So that will make sense to you. If I'm losing you here because you're somebody that doesn't track, bear with me. I'm going to come back to you in just a second. But if you are somebody that is pretty specific about these things, you are tracking, you do like to use things like MyFitnessPal chronometer on at least a semi-regular basis, maybe it's daily for you, but a semi-regular basis, go from 15 to 20% fat. There's some of you, because of previous videos and whatnot following this, who already have 20%. Try that 25. But remember, that change could be redundant based on whether or not your calories change. Does that make sense? So let's segue into that. Calories. You will feel better, probably, most of you, increasing your calories versus what you were doing in a weight loss phase when you get to a weight maintenance phase. So that's the first thing to stress on this. You probably will need to, unless you wish to lose any further weight, which you don't, because you're going into a weight maintenance phase rather consciously. That's the presumption anyway. So there's a lot of you who absolutely will be benefited from and absolutely might need to increase your calories. There are some of you who will sort of naturally get to your, quote unquote, I hate this term, natural body weight. It's not very specific, is it? But you will get to your natural body weight, and your body will find its appetite at that point. Your metabolism will adjust to that change over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And therefore, you actually naturally go from a weight loss phase into a weight maintenance phase, okay? It's not so much of a conscious effort, but there are some people that sort of get to a certain point and they do want to stop, and in order to then not lose any more weight, they apply the strategies I'm talking about here. So I suppose, I wish I mentioned this, I wish I wasn't mentioning this 9 minutes into the live stream here, but it is worth me saying that what I'm about to share in this video probably doesn't apply so much to people that naturally get to the point of weight maintenance. And it becomes, that process, that transition is somewhat, I mean, natural is probably the best word for it. It just somewhat happens for them. And so they probably don't need to change that much with their nutrition or even with their exercise, because their body finds that point fairly effortlessly, let's say. How do you measure that? Well, that's really tricky. So again, maybe that's another live stream for me. But for most of you, I assume, it's a concerted effort to get into this weight maintenance phase. You're wondering what to do, hence why you clicked on this video today. So calories, take them up incrementally. You do probably need to increase your calories to maintain that current weight and not drop further, but don't suddenly add 500 calories to your diet. Don't suddenly add 1,000 calories to your diet. And I know that sounds really obvious, but some people literally do this, folks. They really do. So my advice is take them up incrementally. You've got to allow the metabolism to adapt again. If you suddenly shoot over another 500 calories onto what you were doing before, even though on paper that might be a smart move, it might even be that you need to go more than 500 calories, but your metabolism and your body is not going to be ready for that. And so maybe there will be fat gain that comes with that. So what I would suggest, and this really, folks, it is a rule of thumb. For some of you, this is not going to be enough. For some of you, this will be just about right. But I would say between 100 and 150 calories per week should probably go on your diet until you find the sweet spot. You should add in daily, I should stress, 100, because I said per week, it made it confusing, 100 to 150 calories per day for a week, and then the next week do another 100 to 150 until you find that sweet spot. I suppose, and I hate this because it is so vague and it's not personalized, but hey ho, what can I do? This is a general live stream to a bunch of hundreds of people or thousands of people that will eventually see this, so I can't offer specific advice, but maybe we say for women 100, for men 150. Generalizations there, but that seems to be how it spreads out. So per day for a week until you find that sweet spot. So keep going up and up until you find the sweet spot. Now, what on earth is the sweet spot? How on earth do you know when you've accessed it? This is why, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later on, but this is why you must keep tracking your weight. So a lot of people, they get to their weight maintenance, they get to their weight loss goal, they think, no, don't need the scale anymore, I'm finally here, I've cracked the code, I've got this. Careful, my friend, careful. I appreciate that you might want to take a step back from the scale. I appreciate you don't have to worry. You don't feel like you have to worry about this so much anymore. You feel you've ticked that box, but don't be complacent about these things. I don't think you have to track as meticulously, but I do think you need to monitor your weight. And that way, when I was talking about the sweet spot earlier, you're probably thinking, Ryan, what is the sweet spot? How on earth do I find it? That way, I do think you'll be able to access, you'll be able to find what the sweet spot is with a great deal less risk. Whereas when you're not tracking your weight, there is a good chance that you could just gain 5 kilos. That sounds a bit dramatic. It's, for most of you, 5 kilos is going to be very noticeable. But if you are tracking your weight, even though you're in a weight maintenance phase and you sort of feel odd about it because you thought you were done with the scale, but you're still tracking in a weight maintenance phase, at least you're not going to be shocked when you step on the scale one day and you've gained 5 kilos, because it can't happen if you're tracking. You're going to know well before that. You're going to see each kilo go on. Or maybe more realistically, each half kilo go on. So I think it's really important to track. For most folks, I say track 3 times a week. My clients, they have an exact system for this with averages and whatnot. They track on certain days. I think for most people, just track a couple of times a week, 3 times a week in a weight loss phase. Maybe in weight maintenance phase, maybe it goes to twice a week. I think once is not enough, because once it could be a fluctuation. You could overreact to that fluctuation. You could judge so much of your progress on one particular weigh-in. So I think twice a week. How you separate them, I would say, is up to you. I do think there's merit in clustering your weigh-ins in one part of the week, because the natural thing to do here would be say, okay, I'm weighing in on Mondays and Fridays. Okay, I've got 2 a week. How can I spread them? Tuesdays and Fridays. That sounds about right, doesn't it? Sundays and Wednesdays, for example. However, the problem with that is, if there is a fluctuation, you've got a long time before you know again. You've got to confirm or deny that suspicion. Or disprove, I should say, that suspicion. So I would say that keeping those relatively together would be smart, like maybe one weigh-in on a Wednesday and one weigh-in on a Friday. I think that sounds good to me. So I would suggest weighing yourself at least twice a week in a weight maintenance phase. This isn't forever, folks. This isn't permanent, but certainly in the first couple of months, maybe the first 2 months you do this, I would suggest. Again, these are rules of thumb. I can find individuals that have a different scenario or different barriers, or, you know, maybe they struggle with weight maintenance more than weight. Like, it needs a case-by-case analysis, but generally, maybe for the first 2 months, you weigh yourself twice a week, and that way, you're not going to be shocked by suddenly gaining a couple of kilos or anything like that, or a bunch of pounds. Also important to stress that weight gain initially certainly could be temporary, because it could just be that you're now consuming more food, maybe there's more water retention in the body now, and so maybe it looks like the scale is going up, maybe it's not initially fat gain. That's tricky. You're gonna have to work that out for yourself. If it keeps continuing to rise after the first 1 week, maybe 2 week mark, then you're talking fat gain. Then you're probably talking fat gain, unless it's proportionate to the amount of food extra you're eating every single week, the poundage of food you're eating. So you might need to get your calculator out at some point. These are just rules of thumb. But I suppose just my point here is don't freak out initially necessarily about weight gain right at the start, the first couple of days, the first week, the first 2 weeks, because it could just be more food and water volume as a result of you increasing your calories, your fat intake, so on and so forth. So, and we'll come on to exercise too. Maybe you're sweating less with exercise. That could make a small difference too. These are very minor things, folks, but enough for many people, enough anyway to skew the scale for many people and maybe cause them a little bit of confusion with this. So 100 to 150 calories, as a rule of thumb. There are some people that should do more than this. There are some people, I don't think there's many people that should do less, but there could be some people that might need to do less than this initially. But go up until you find that sweet spot where your weight looks like it is staying the same over weeks, not just a couple of weigh-ins, but over the course of weeks. If it's staying the same and you're feeling good doing this, you've hit that sweet spot. If you're continuing to lose, it's not enough of an increase. So skip ahead and go to add that next week's worth of 100 calories in, 150. Maybe it's you need to go to 200, 250 and so on. I think I just stress caution. Don't get carried away with these jumps. Do things in gradual, quote unquote, it's cliche, but baby steps. I think that's a good rule of thumb. Now, back to those of you who aren't tracking your calories and you are doing things a little bit more, quote unquote, intuitively in the way that I often prescribe here. Increase your portions a little is probably the first rule. Add a few more calorie-dense plants into your diet, so some of these more fat-rich plants, the nuts, the seeds, the avocados. If you were having one tablespoon of flax on your oatmeal in the morning, have 2. If you were having half an avocado every day, maybe you go to 1 avocado every single day. Again, it's not necessarily the case that you ought to do all of these things at once, but again, incrementally, I'm drilling that into you here because it's really important. It's a really smart, cautious, sensible way to do things, slowly, slowly, slowly. Increase your portions a little. Have a few more calorie-dense plants into your diet. Maybe you move away from, more water-rich fruits like citrus fruits and peaches, and maybe you have a few more bananas and maybe a little bit of dried fruit as well to bring those calories up. So it's not that you necessarily need to leave behind any food group. There are some people that say, Ryan, should I adjust the starch to veggie ratio versus in a weight loss phase where maybe I reduce the starch, increase the veggies and fruit? Should I then do it the other way around? Well, that's one good rule of thumb, yeah. It's not necessarily sometimes the case that you even need to move away from a food group or adjust a food group like, starches aren't a food group, or I don't define them as such. There are a multitude of food groups combined, but based on one characteristic. But getting lost in the details, sometimes you can keep the starch portion the same, in other words, but just change the exact food included. So for you, maybe it's moving from more buckwheat to more brown rice, because brown rice is more calorie and fat dense. And so therefore by switching, keeping the starch portion in your diet the same, keeping your whole grains in a meal the same roughly volume of a meal, you can actually just change the calories quite a decent way. I mean, it's a small change, but a fairly significant way just by changing the type of whole grain that it actually is. Does that make sense? You can do this with beans too. You can move towards more soybeans, add a bit more tofu, tempeh, as I say, into your diet. Chickpeas, they're higher in fat and calories than lentils or red kidney beans, for example. Red kidney beans, one of the best beans from a weight loss perspective in terms of both the fiber and the calorie density there. And so you could move away from red kidney beans to more chickpeas. So it's not that you need to ditch beans, add beans, more legumes, more whole grains, less veggies, less fruit. And that might be one strategy, but I also want to just let you know that you can go to this level of detail, and these are the nuances that I really help people with in the last 10 pounds program, and helping people really dial it in for that last bit of body fat, It's like you can do the reverse of those things. So sometimes I get my clients to, have less grains and maybe more white potato or sweet potato, for instance, and therefore lower the calorie density, lower the fat content of their meals, but keep the volume the same. You can often just do those things often in reverse. So know that it's not just a binary sort of, okay, I need to now increase my starch because I reduced it whilst I was losing, or to get through my most recent plateau. Yeah, that could be a good rule of thumb, so I don't want to be too dismissive of that, but also just know that you've got the option there, and it is really detailed, but you've got the option there of changing the starch. Does that make sense? And that's a really powerful thing to know as well. You guys, folks, have a look at a calorie density chart. If you're one of my clients, you've already probably got the good, better, best food model. If you don't, hit me up, drop me an email, drop me a WhatsApp about it. I'll hook you up with that. But have a look at a calorie density chart. go online and look up, calorie density. And it's not just calories that matter. It's not just calories that matter for this, but they are an important metric. Fiber is also a great determinant of a food's effectiveness from a weight loss perspective too. As I mentioned with the red kidney beans earlier, they've got such a great, cross-section of both, it's not quite the right term, overlap of both calorie density and fiber content. It just makes them amazing. Unrivaled, I would say, in the bean category, certainly, and amongst lots of lentils as well. So, yeah, again, we're getting into the details, we're getting into the nitty-gritty, but that's what you guys wanted. That's what you wanted. You wanted the strategy, you wanted the tactics. So that's what you could do. Just add a few more calorie-dense plants into your diet. If you're not tracking, increase your portions a little. And as I say, keep weighing, keep monitoring, and find the sweet spot that way. For those of you who are tracking more meticulously, 100 to 150 calories, you can be more specific. Can you eat out more? This is a question I often get asked. Can you eat out more? Yeah, quite obviously you can, because you've got a bit more caution. You've got a bit more leeway with your calories, probably. You can get away with it a bit more. That sort of puts eating out in a negative frame of mind, doesn't it? Because negative connotations there. Because eating out isn't always bad. I mean, you can eat out and you can have a better meal than you can at home sometimes. Depends what's going in there. But generally speaking, you're not going to have, even if there are some really clean things on the menu, most people are going to go for that vegan burger. They're going to occasionally have one of those things. And by the way, no issues with that. That's something that I do nowadays. Absolutely, once in a while I do have those things, and I do enjoy those things nowadays. Do I eat out now more that I've lost weight than I did when I was really, really working hard in a weight loss phase? Yes, I definitely eat out more. A lot more, actually. A lot more. I don't do it crazy. I do maybe twice a week. Roughly, it depends if I'm traveling. Right now, it's probably only once a week, but usually on average, maybe over the course of, months and years, it's probably more like twice a week. You'll find occasions where it's 4 times a week. You'll find occasions where I don't eat out for 3 weeks. Just my lifestyle. But right now, anyway, it's pretty quiet with it. But when I'm traveling more, it definitely goes up. But yeah, generally, you can eat out more because you've got more leeway. Does this mean you go crazy? No. What I would suggest to you is that rules are important because they help you stay disciplined. They help set boundaries. They help draw a clear line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior and actions. And so I've just realized, I realized it earlier, that this live stream is so bright because of my lighting here. I'm sitting too close, I don't know. So forgive me, folks. Not the best quality, these live streams, they never are. But I hope you're finding the info valuable, at least, even if I look like Casper the Ghost. Where were we? So, yeah, you definitely can eat out, but sometimes it's worth setting rules. So let's say in a weight loss phase, you were limiting your eating out to once a week. Maybe you didn't do it. Like, there are lots of my clients that don't eat out in their 90 days, and that's something we discuss and agree on. So that's fantastic. So for them, maybe it's just once a week we open it up to. We don't suddenly go from 0 times eating out to every single week to 5. And even then, when they do eat out, we're coming up with a bit more of an agreeable strategy for what they do. We're looking sometimes at the menu ahead of time. Maybe we are saying, no dessert, no wine, no beer, anything like that. I mean, it depends on the situation, but obviously from a health perspective, these things aren't advisable. It's not advisable that you go out and have a really oily vegan burger. It's not advisable that you go and have some vegan ice cream or vegan cheesecake or a bunch of wine or beer. And these things are not advisable, but I understand that from a practicality and adherence point of view, these things are going to happen once in a while. And so you have to take the rough with the smooth. You have to, this is that whole consistency versus perfection thing that I'm constantly talking about. So can you eat out more? For sure. But I do think for the sake of you, for the sake of staying committed, for the sake of keeping some discipline, even though allowing yourself a touch more freedom and leeway, maybe wise to set a rule here on how many times per week, and maybe then some rules about what you actually do. Do you say no dessert? Do you say no starter? Blah, blah, blah. And again, who's to say that you can't make it work and you can't make it fit? Who's to say that it isn't, that starter that you might have isn't really clean? These are just rules of thumb. So also depends on the restaurants that you would go to or the cafes that you would go to too. But generally, yeah, you can eat out a little bit more. Just don't go wild. You probably predict my advice on this stuff. Again, just to bring it back to my mantra at the start here, these are 2 different phases. Weight loss, weight maintenance, these are 2 different phases. There are 2 different goals in mind, and therefore they should be treated differently, but not extremely differently. So don't veer away too far from what you were doing to lose that weight, because we know it works, because we know probably, if you're taking the right strategy, it's also healthy at the same time. So consider the health aspect to this too, right? You could maintain weight by being a bit more flexible and allowing a few more things into your diet and eating out a bit more if you make the right sort of cutbacks in other areas and negotiations in other areas of your diet. But is that necessarily the healthiest thing for you? No, of course. My audience, they want health. You guys, you care about health as well as the weight loss. So that's on your side too. So a lot of you, you're not even going to be that, by the time you've lost the weight, by the time you've changed your habits and your taste buds have changed, you've gone through this important sort of internal transformation that I'm always talking about for weight loss, you're probably going to, and this is one of my later points, you're probably going to get to your weight loss goal and not be that bothered about eating out all that much anyway, not be that bothered about the vegan Ben and Jerry's anyway at that stage. That's the goal with my clients. Like, I don't want them, I want to fix their relationship with food, right? I don't want them to just lose weight and still have the same relationship with food and still have the same cravings and the same thoughts and beliefs surrounding food. I want to change their relationship with food in the weight loss process. I want to make them health motivated. I want them to feed themselves nourishing food, and I want them to value that, most importantly, so that can happen. So that's worth stressing too. It's like a lot of the people I help here, they don't get to their goal and suddenly think, oh, okay, let's binge, let's go wild. Some people might do that, but that's not their intention, because we really also, my audience really also cares about the health side of things too. So that's going to lean on that, because at times that's probably going to stop you going too far. Exercise then, tricky one, because it depends on a couple of factors, and I don't have time to run through all those factors. Generally, yes, you probably can do less exercise. I would say the first port of call is you probably got license to be a lot less intense. So if you're doing lots of very intense forms of exercise every single week, runs, swims, bike rides at a reasonably vigorous level, HIIT workouts, you know, a bit of strength training as well, but there was minimal, you know, rest between sets, so on and so forth, you can probably afford to be a bit more laissez-faire. I certainly could. I certainly can. I don't like that because I absolutely love exercise. And so actually my exercise in a weight loss phase and weight maintenance phase has not changed. If anything, I would say I actually do more exercise now in a weight maintenance phase. That's purely because of preference and also schedule, actually. My schedule has changed a little bit since when I happened to be losing weight in years gone by. And so I actually enjoy and I'm happy and feel obligated to do a bit more exercise nowadays, and I love it, and more intense exercise. So again, these are rules of thumb, but generally you can I think the key thing to stress is you don't have to, but you can do less exercise. Like now, I could do less exercise. Now, I actually have to eat a lot more to compensate for the extra exercise I do just to maintain, otherwise I would lose further with the amount of exercise I do. I'm not saying what I do is it's probably actually not that smart unless I'm adjusting my calories and my intake accordingly, which can be tricky for me sometimes because of other commitments and whatnot. See, I've got to that stage. I used to be, you know, you guys know my story. I won't harp on about it. But there was just a time when I was a student. I was so unfulfilled and so bored that all I wanted to do was eat. Now, there's commitments. I feel really passionate. I've got a clear mission in life. I'm really happy with the way my life's going, that for me, food really is an afterthought. So sometimes for me, it's now getting enough food, especially, as I say, to go back to the point, with my now more intense exercise regime every week. So yeah, I think the thing to stress is you might not want to, you might not have to, but you can probably do less exercise, and certainly less intense exercise. So maybe it means you drop one of those sessions every week. For whatever it is. Maybe it means that you transition from more runs to more yoga and walking. The one thing I would stress, the one thing I've seen time and time again with folks, is even those that come to me, my clients, that absolutely detest exercise, and I do get a few that absolutely can't stand. There are a lot that don't mind it. There are parts of it they enjoy, but they're not particularly used to doing it, and they just sort of swallow their pride and get on with it, so to speak. And then there are some that really, really detest it, and it's hard work to get them on track with it. But by the time they get to the end of maybe our 8 weeks or our 90 days together, or our 5 months together, whatever the coaching period is, let's say, a lot of them, they don't want to cut back on it. They don't want to. They love it. It's become part of their lifestyle. They're feeling really great and wonderful doing it. And so the prospect of doing less, it's like, no, it's really a last resort. And that's probably why the food change should be first. But there are some people, especially when it comes to like the last, and it depends what your specific goal is, but the last 10 pounds, or if you're looking to get a lot more lean than most of my audience want, because most of my audience, they don't necessarily want like the chiseled abs or anything like that. They want to be a slim, lean bean. They don't want anything crazy. But if you do want something a bit more crazy, if you do want the abs, really flat stomach, if you do want a bit more of that toned look or more athletic look, let's say, and lower digits of body fat, then it's probably the case that your exercise has had to be increased to get you through that final hurdle, versus somebody that was just looking to get slim that has increased their exercise, but it's been more of a nutrition-centered approach. So that's a good point that I didn't have in my notes here, but I just thought of. That makes a difference too. What your particular goal is with weight loss, that makes a difference too. If you've had to really hone in on the exercise and really up the ante with exercise in terms of the intensity and frequency, because you wanted to get really, really lean versus just slim, let's say, then for you, you probably do want to do less. You probably do need to do less for your mental sake and for the sake of time and maybe the toll on the body as well. Whereas somebody who was only doing maybe 4 or 5 sessions, semi-intense sessions a week, maybe that's good for them. Maybe that's not too troublesome versus maybe something more like on a daily basis that is more intense, that you're pushing yourself harder. Makes sense? So that matters too. But generally with exercise, you can do less and you can be less intense. I've just gone the other way with it. I think one important note before I move on to more mindset related stuff is with my teachings, I think the goal of a successful weight loss phase feeds in to a successful weight maintenance phase. I'm not explaining that well, but my criteria for successful weight loss also factors in principles for successful weight maintenance. Again, still not explaining that well, so thank you if you're following me. But my philosophy and my approach to weight loss also has a sprinkling of some of the principles, strategies, and ideas required for weight maintenance. And I've done that very consciously, and I've done that on purpose. This is why I talk about things like sustainability. This is why I say things like consistency over perfection. These little mottos, even though on paper they sound kind of worthless until you really see it in action for yourself and how important they are for yourself. This is why I talk about longevity. This is why I talk about adherence. This is why I talk about making things work for you. This is why, when I often give advice on things like meal frequency, I don't sit down and look. I do sit down and look at the science, but I don't sit down, look at the science, and then just regurgitate the science and say, okay, it's better if you distribute your calories earlier in the day, which it is, demonstrably, from a weight loss perspective. We're talking about a fine margin, but it provably is. But instead of saying, well, I might say that, but I would also add, but folks, ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to find what you can actually stick to. And that's why I say those little cliche and somewhat cheesy lines, but they are so valuable to people because so many people come into this thinking that they need to eat a certain amount of meals. I need 5 small meals a day because that's best for the metabolism. And we can debate how true that is to various degrees. And we can discuss that in another live stream, perhaps, meal frequency, the ins and outs. That's a good idea for me, actually, because it is valid. It does have merit to explore. But the problem is people get so caught up on that they forget what works for them. And is there that much consistency? Is it sustainable to follow something that doesn't fit your schedule or you don't actually enjoy doing and it is a bit laborious for you? So that's worth considering too, absolutely. So I think what I'm trying to illustrate here is by my standards anyway, with a really successful weight loss phase, weight maintenance is going to be a lot easier for you. I think if you follow one of those typical diets, one of those typical like summer shred downs, maybe an extreme exercise program, I do think, although it might work for the weight loss, I do think it doesn't feed that naturally or that easily into a weight maintenance phase. And I think that's why, as well, I talk about mindset so much, because when you can fix you and your relationship with food and relationship with yourself and relationship with exercise and limiting beliefs and impatience issues and all sorts of the stories and narratives that have run you in the past, when you can fix these things in the weight loss process, then weight maintenance becomes a lot more natural. It becomes a lot, quote unquote, easier. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but it becomes easier. Versus like a typical diet where you shred down really quickly, you maybe don't fix your relationship with food, maybe you're following a flexible dieting approach, maybe you're going too far with the calorie counting, getting really neurotic about that, maybe your exercise plan is extremely demanding and therefore not sustainable, high risk of injury, high risk of burnout, yada, 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 and you don't fix any of these internal issues, the facets of the mindset that relate to weight loss, then you ain't gonna feed into a weight maintenance phase all that easily, are you? If anything, you're just going to rebound up. You're not even probably going to get, most people that do that, they don't even get to their weight loss goal, never mind even thinking about weight maintenance. So I do think that I really stress to you, because a lot of people treat the weight loss phase as the means to the end, which is weight maintenance, getting to their goal weight and being able to maintain that. What I stress to you is, yeah, see it as that, see it as the vehicle that gets you to that goal, absolutely, because realistically that's what it is. But also realize the more you can practice principles in the weight loss phase that are symbiotic that align with principles in a weight maintenance phase, the better off you will be for that transition. Does that make sense? So for me, there's an awful lot about, for example, the vegan slim and sustain system, which is my one-on-one coaching program. There's a reason why it's called slim and sustain, hint, hint. But there's a lot of the design of that program where I have absolutely consciously been thinking about sustaining, clues in the name, weight loss. I've been thinking, excuse me, that's my doorbell ringing, hopefully my roommate gets that, by thinking about how to make that transition more easy, how to get the mind right for that transition best, how, as I said earlier, to fix that relationship with food. I've designed that program so that the weight loss phase and the weight maintenance phase have a lot of similar principles. Does that make sense? So I think that's it too. I think I've been talking about this far too long, but my final point on this was really with my teachings, the goal, and part of the reason why I practice, yes, myself, but teach certain principles in the way that I do. It's not just about weight loss, even though this is natural weight loss mastery. There is also a weight maintenance. It's part of my criteria, okay? I don't suddenly just think about weight maintenance for my clients when they get to the point where they need to maintain their weight. I'm also thinking about it in the weight loss phase, and I really encourage you to be a little bit more conscious of that. Think to yourself, if you're doing something in a weight loss phase that seems like it can't stick, or you can't really imagine yourself doing in 2 years' time, you got to audit that now. You might have to troubleshoot that now versus just thinking, okay, this is a means to an end, because maybe it isn't a means to an end. Make sense? Another important point, no resting on your laurels. Your mind will trick you into comfort once you get to your goal. You'll have those little voices creep back in. It's inevitable. You can eat this now. You don't have to work out today and so on. Be aware of this. And there might be merit to that. You do have a little bit more leeway. You do have a little bit more freedom, as I said earlier, but you've got to be very conscious of this. You've got to hear that voice. You've got to play devil's advocate with it. Make sure it's absolutely true. You can indeed, as I say, afford to relax a little, but don't let those standards completely slip away. That's what complacency is, right? You have a bit of success and then you rest on your laurels. This is what a lot of people do. So be aware of that. Next up, remember, and my clients love this when I say this, that small leaks sink big ships. I feel like that's a Benjamin Franklin quote, if I remember correctly. Small leaks sink big ships. A couple of slips with your discipline, a couple of slips with the diet, the good habits, the exercise. It can shift your behavior in a way that you can't even see at the time, because you're justifying it by saying, oh, it's just a couple of small, little slip-ups here and there, or it's just a few allowances here and there. But the accumulation of those things, how can it start to change your thinking and your behavior and therefore your results? Massively, actually, over time, if you let those things snowball. So whilst perfection isn't required and it's not realistic, and you don't have to be as on your case, you don't have to keep those same outrageously high standards as when you were in a weight loss phase, consistency is absolutely required. Perfection isn't, but consistency absolutely is. So yeah, have those allowances once in a while. Yeah, you can get away with more quote unquote slip ups, but just be very vigilant with it, I stress. Don't get to your goal and suddenly go wild, because that's what a lot of people do as well. If you've done, and as I said earlier, just a minute ago, if you've done things correctly in the weight loss phase from a mindset and strategy standpoint, you should no longer want for that junk food as much anymore. You should no longer be happy just sitting on the settee, the sofa all day, on the couch and being lazy. That should not be in your DNA when you have the right philosophy in terms of losing weight. That's exactly a great illustration of what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago with this. So yeah, you should no longer want for those things. Another important point, although I do think this is, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this towards the end of my talk here today, my broadcast here, folks, because I don't think it's as relevant, but it is worth mentioning, except that being slim is now part of your personal and social identity. You're a slim person now. Many who have mastered their weight have never experienced this, so it can be, this is something that for many people it's so far outside of their comprehension. So when they do get there, it's a bit of a foreign feeling to them. It's a bit of an alien feeling. You absolutely must own it. You must be okay with it. You must accept it as your identity and perhaps how others see you, because you will get comments for it. And it might be strange, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, as I say, foreign to you at first, but you have to accept that now, that you are now a slim person. And once you have that acceptance, it changes your, I know this is very conceptual, but it does change your standards, it does change your attitude towards yourself. And it makes slipping back into your old identity, most importantly, even harder. So yeah, once you can embrace that, accept this new person that you are with these new ideas and these new attitudes, these new beliefs, these new values that you have surrounding health, nutrition, fitness, weight, well-being, yourself, your relationship with body image, your relationship with yourself, I think true acceptance of that is going to really cement your identity in a way whereby it's going to be very hard to backtrack. So I think that's a really, really good point. I think for me, one of the best things this wasn't why I did this. One of the best things I could do to guarantee that I maintained weight after losing it was starting this YouTube channel, because I'm now accountable to thousands of people online, which is really bizarre versus a few years ago. So, that's not why I started this, but it's probably a side benefit if I think about it. It's solidified my identity even more. Excuse me, folks, lost my voice completely there. When you talk a lot like I do, you really do, your palate gets really dry. There are some cases where I'd like to do like 2-hour live streams, but I just can't do it. I don't have enough water. I've already consumed a bunch before starting. So I think I've got 2 bottles here and they're already empty. So yeah, I won't be able to stick around too much longer. But where was I? Totally lost my train of thought. But anyway, for me, starting Natural Weight Loss Mastery, what a genius move that was in terms of that accountability, solidifying my identity. That's what I was going to say. There have actually been points, not many, because I've come a long way with this myself anyway, but there have been points of time where I've been on the cusp of making maybe a poor nutrition decision, or maybe skipping a workout and thinking, wow, what would my client think if they saw this? Or what would one of my Natural Weight Loss Mastery subscribers on YouTube think if they saw this? And I've used that as a way to leverage good behavior. So there have been times where that accountability has been very real, consciously. Although I imagine also subconsciously, it's really solidified in me now that I can't let this slip, that I can't suddenly rebound, because I'm responsible here, because I'm, a figurehead, quote unquote. I don't want to put myself on a pedestal, but I'm a figurehead for some people. I'm a role model for some people. That sounds horrible to say about myself, but you get what I mean. And so I can leverage that to ensure that I keep continuing good behaviors with this. So, and that, that's a great way for me to solidify and cement, my identity from a weight loss perspective, if that makes sense. So I think that's been really big for me as well. So yeah, for you, accept that being slim is now part of your personal and social identity, and therefore you're going to be less likely to move backwards. Whereas if you feel a bit funny about it for too long, it's going to be strange at first anyway, but if you feel funny about it for too long, if you feel awkward in your friend group now, if there's a lot of people around you saying, oh, you're now too skinny, you've gone too far with this, you've lost too much weight, are you going to be pressured into maybe gaining a bit more weight and going back to those identities, behaviors, habits of the past? Maybe. So true acceptance can allow you to be in that situation. People are saying those sorts of things, and it's water off a duck's back. You don't care what they think. And so you need that, even if they're your loved ones. Sometimes you need to be able to switch that on at times. Sometimes it's good to take other people's counsel and advice. Not always. Even if you respect them and love them, not always do you have to do that. And so, yeah, I think true acceptance with this allows those social situations where people might say, oh, you're too skinny, you've lost too much weight. Especially when they know you're doing the vegan or plant-based thing. They're like, oh, no, you're malnourished, blah, 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 blah. What about protein, yada, yada, yada. True acceptance is going to allow you to keep out that external noise a lot more easily and cement where you are right now instead of being pressured into doing something. Oh, you can come out to eat with us now. Oh, you can come out for more beers with us now, blah, 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 blah. And it's maybe you want to do that once in a while with them, fair enough. But the more you accept where you are now and you don't push back, you don't resist, you don't feel funny about it, you don't feel funny about people's expectations of you changing or going against their story of you this is easier said than done with peer pressure because we are social creatures. But the more you can do that, the more safe you're going to be in terms of not going backwards. Make sense? Remember I've already mentioned this, but remember the tactics that got you slim. Okay, once we get to our goal, the mind can start to play tricks. I mentioned this earlier. Maybe we can have a little bit more fat now, a little more this, a little more that. I mean, I've given you actionable advice on having a little bit more fat, and I've actually suggested it for many of you in my audience. But those things might be true to an extent, but don't completely disregard what made you slim in the first place. Again, it's not going from a low-fat, and I sort of hinted at this earlier, but you're not going from a low-fat plant-based approach like I advocate to a keto plant-based approach or anything radical. You're not suddenly, maybe to take it one step further here, you're not suddenly adding a load of animal products into your diet when you didn't have those things to get slim. Not that I would advocate that anyway from a health or an ethical standpoint, but for weight loss as well. And so you're not making a radical change in your strategies once you hit your goals. That'd be the worst thing to do. So remember, overall, the philosophy that got you slim. This is what I meant earlier. Yeah, weight management, weight maintenance, and weight loss, 2 different things, and they require to be treated. They require you to treat them as such, as 2 different things, 2 different goals, 2 different phases, and therefore you have different strategy around those things. But don't make that strategy polar opposite. It just requires a few tweaks and adjustments. Okay, this is what I mentioned with the calories. You up them gradually. You don't suddenly add 1,000 on. With the fat, you don't go from 15% to 50%. Okay, you make these small adjustments. You don't go from having you know, a handful of nuts and seeds a day to a whole bag of cashews, okay? You make these small increments, not a radical flip-flop. So, and I know this sounds really obvious, but a lot of people, when they do get to their goal, the mind does start to play tricks and things do start to happen and they do start to get maybe confused or paranoid about what to do. And maybe they do see the scale go up or down further or whatever. And so maybe they do think, okay, now I need really high fat diet to sort of counterbalance. That's what a lot of people do. Like in a car, they overcorrect to come back the other way. Maybe if they have to slide away from something in the road, then they overcorrect, shoot and go into the other lane and hit the oncoming traffic. You don't want to do that from a weight loss perspective. Be cautious of overcorrecting, just small little changes here and there. A few things might need tweaking, as I say, and I've literally given you examples of this, so I'm not contradicting my earlier advice, but I'm just mentioning the word tweaking, adjusting, not wholesale change, not a radical shift. If you were using measuring cups before in order to lose weight and you were weighing out your food, keep doing so. You can be a bit more loose. You don't maybe have to do it every day, but keep roughly doing so. Otherwise, there's a greater risk there of throwing everything away. It might not be that you need to, it might be that you can trust yourself, it might be that you can eyeball things now. But maybe for the first couple of weeks, you keep using those things at least every now and again, so that you still got some of the old structures and systems that you had in the past. You're not completely dismissing and disregarding the stuff that worked for you. If you exercise 3 times a week, don't suddenly go to 1, okay? Maybe at first stick with 3, but lighten the load a little bit. Do a bit of a shorter workout. Don't go as hard on the bike or on the run or in the pool, okay? Stick with 3 times a week. Don't suddenly go to 1, or maybe do go to 2, but keep them relatively intense. For example, no massive changes, just small tweaks. Still monitor your progress. I mentioned this earlier. Jump on the scales every now and again. I would suggest weighing twice a week, Wednesday and Friday, as I said earlier. Keep an eye on your physique in the mirror. That's hard to do. Rather than suddenly realizing that you've gained a bunch of weight because you haven't tracked. Make sense? Also, allow small fluctuations. We get so caught up with the numbers, and a lot of you have learned this in the weight loss process, so I won't spend too long on this one now. But permit those small fluctuations. We get so caught up in the numbers that even a half-pound deviation can scare us and we think we're gaining. Not always true. So remember those daily fluctuations. You've likely experienced this when you're losing weight. Again, this is why you should use a way to monitor your progress on a spreadsheet like my clients and my weight tracker. My clients get to use my weight tracker, and this literally shows them the role of fluctuations, and this gets them focusing on the average weekly trend versus sort of microanalyzing each individual weigh-in, which could be unreliable anyway. Really smart. So if you've got a good way of tracking during weight loss, it's likely that in the weight maintenance phase, you're not going to freak out about little fluctuations. But if it's half a pound or a pound deviation, it's not always a sign, folks. Could be just a little thing here and there. And if it's suddenly shot up from one day to the next, it's probably not fat gain either. You're looking for change over time, really, as a rule of thumb. Week to week change versus day by day, weigh-in by weigh-in change. Makes sense? Look for those trends more so. Finally here, don't eat your feelings. Many people turn to food to deal with stress and anxiety. You can't afford to fall into that trap. Maybe you resisted that well during the weight loss phase. That shouldn't change in the weight maintenance phase either. The bottom line, folks, and I started out by saying there's 2 things you need to address when it comes to weight maintenance. One is the strategy, one is the mindset. At first, I shared a bunch with you in terms of the strategy and the tactics. So if you're just joining this stream now, most of you, I'm sure, watching the replay, but if you're just joining now, go back to the start. I talk about fat intake, I talk about calories, I talk about eating out, I talk about what to do with exercise. I give you the specifics. That's what a lot of people want. So you got the strategy and you got the mindset. Those are the 2 things that you need to think about to successfully maintain weight. Doing one or the other won't work. You need both to some degree. You might not be perfect with both, but you need to consider both at least as a rule of thumb. The bottom line on the mindset stuff is don't let your mindset change much. Be vigilant. I used vigilant earlier. Be tough. Hopefully, this is natural after a successful weight loss phase. Hopefully, you've changed and you've built these new habits and you've changed your beliefs and you've gone through, as I say, the internal transformation. And so therefore, keeping that same mindset is not going to be difficult for you. You keep those standards high. Don't let it change much with the mindset. With the strategy, change things in gradual increments and monitor your progress. That's the bottom line. Mindset, don't let it change much. Be vigilant. Hopefully that's already happened and you've become a new person in this weight loss phase, so it'll be effortless for you. And 2, with the strategy, change things in gradual increments rather than radical switches and monitor your progress so you know if you're going too far. That's the bottom line on this, folks. That's how I would sum all of those little tactics up that I've shared with you today. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? So are you somebody that's in a weight loss phase? Let me know in the comments, let me know in the chat if you're live. There's not many of you on because of the time I'm filming this. And I'm happy to do a couple of questions if they do come in. I actually can't see any, I can only see a couple of comments. So now is the time, folks, to submit a couple of questions. I've got 10 or so minutes more I can spend with you, so I'd love to answer a couple of questions. If not, I'm going to hit the road. Let me read these comments here from Bogdan. I don't think there's anything like too skinny. Maybe you need to introduce some training and workouts to define your muscle and body. Acceptance and new goals are key. Yeah, I largely agree with that, Bogdan. I'm not quite sure what you mean by there's no such thing, or there isn't anything like too skinny. It depends what you mean by that. Baby steps are nothing happens. Baby steps is nothing happens overnight. You're absolutely right. It takes a long time to lose the weight, and you need time as well to adapt to your new weight. And then you will naturally maintain it with no problem. Yeah, I think that's reasonable advice, Bogdan. Very sensible advice. Like, the metabolism needs time to adapt. You need time to adapt. You know, you're having a big goal change as well. Maybe for the first month or year, a couple of months or even year or years, you've been so focused on weight loss. So to wrap your head around that that's not the goal anymore, it will take some adjusting. There's certain things you'll have to let go of and detach from in order to successfully do that. No comments and questions coming in, folks, so that could be a good thing. That could be a good thing. You guys seem to know everything you need to know if you don't have any questions, so that's really great. Here we go. I'll do this last one, then I'll hit the road. I've been eating plant-based diet but not losing weight. I do eat out a lot, even though it's soup and salad in plant-based restaurants. I'm confused. I would love to help you. There's just so many follow-up questions I've got from that. It depends exactly what because you mentioned you're eating plant-based. What are you eating? I've got no idea. Okay, going whole foods plant-based, that's a good rule of thumb. A lot of people sort of lose weight just with this mantra of eating more plants. But I'm afraid to say I don't know exactly what you're eating. What plant foods are you eating? How selective are you being about those? What are your portions like? What are your goals? What current weight are you now? What would you like to achieve? So I've got a lot of follow-up questions for you. So what I would suggest to you is send me a DM on Instagram. It's at Ryan Adams UK. And I'd love to troubleshoot for you further. I'd love to give you a bit of free advice over on Instagram. So shoot me a message there. It's at Ryan Adams UK. Folks, I'm going to call it a day. Hopefully you got lots of advice on how to maintain weight from this little broadcast here. Whether you're live or catching the replay, I thank you for your time today. And I'll speak to you very soon. All the best. Thanks.